Big news just in. New ban list dropped for the Living Legend format, and it is final. Let's talk about it. So, as we've been kind of revisiting this topic over the last couple months, the Living Legend format has been in flux ever since it was really announced that it was going to be one of the main formats at Worlds. We've gone through a series of ban lists, a series of changes, and we have just got the final update, and they have confirmed that this is what the meta is going to look like going forward. There's going to be no more bans, no more restrictions, no more changes. This is going to be the meta that we have to expect and to work with as we move into the Living Legend format for Worlds. So what is that going to look like? Today we were just announced that Deadwood Dirge has been restricted yet again, but even more surprising on top of that, Rosetta Thorn has now been completely banned, so it is not playable. And I really agree with these changes. I think that they are great. If you had watched the video that Levi and I had put out last week regarding the discussion we had about Living Legend format, we were pretty much in agreement that Dirge needed to be restricted. The card was just a little too egregious. It was opening up too many advantage playlines for RuneGate Chain and Vizarai specifically, which was really allowing Runeblades to dominate and consistently just enact their game plan without much investment, without much restriction, and that just allowed them to freely kind of navigate and leverage their card pool in a kind of broken way. I guess we could just leave it at that. So with that being restricted now, and we even had kind of estimated that it was unrestricted because of the Vizarai Armory deck that had come out ahead at 3. LSS just coming forward and being honest and just saying, look, we just know that this is problematic and it needs to be restricted. So great on them. Very happy about that decision. I do ultimately think that is correct and what needs to happen for the meta so that Runeblades do not just completely consume the largest share of the meta, and that's all we really see players bringing when they come into the Worlds format. And on top of that, then, Rosetta Thorn being banned, which honestly was a little bit of a surprise to me, but I really don't see it as being that big of a surprise. I mean, it does make a lot of sense. I think that Rosetta Thorn, even throughout its entire time when it was legal in Class Constructed, was a little pushed, in my opinion. Like, I think that that was kind of an unfair advantage a lot of times, really put the Runeblades above where they were at. And I know the player base throughout that entire era was very much in contention of thinking that the card deserved to be banned just because of the flexibility and just raw power that it provided to all the Runeblades, not just Briar, but every single one across the board. And I think we're still seeing that advantage in Living Legend, barring the fact that it is not insanely ahead compared to what else is available in Living Legend. It still just provides a very consistent, powerful weapon that doesn't have much doesn't require much cost for all the Runeblades to play to net the upside that it provides to them. So seeing it gone, I think we just will very cleanly see a swap to all of them playing Reaping Blade and DUSKBLADE primarily, because a lot of these decks are going to change now. And by a lot, I think primarily just Chain and Vizarai, but that's going to have a pretty significant impact on the overall meta and allow a little bit more space for some of these other decks to pierce through. So I have my notes over here just to reference, but I think the first thing to talk about is that Chain and Vizarai have the biggest hit, obviously, coming from this ban. I think Vizarai was just able to leverage Bloodsheath a little bit too consistently because of Dirge, and then Chain having access to the RuneGate card pool was just ridiculous, like an insanely powerful deck, and Dirge just really allowed you to freely access those cards without much restriction or not much cost in order to have them. So by having Dirge restricted back down to 1, it'll make it a lot more difficult to have access to that card pool, and we probably will see people reverting back to more of a Boomer Chain style list while leveraging cards like Seeds of Agony and, of course, the old card pool, which I'm not exactly sure if that's good enough, to be honest, for Chain. But Chain is just still always insanely powerful and never a deck that you'd want to count out when looking forward to the Living Legend meta. I do just think that some of these professional players will be opting to look for something that nets them a higher upside and gives them a bigger advantage going into the World's meta. So we could very easily see Chain fall off very hard and really fall out of favor with a lot of professional level players when they look to pick up another deck. Now Vizarai, I think, is a little bit of a different story. I can still see Vizarai functioning at a very high level going forward. Losing Dirge is a big hit, but I do think that we are seeing Vizarai be played in a very malleable, or I'm sorry, Vizarai has a lot of malleability, right, to his hero ability. Like, you can play very aggressively, you can play very defensively, you can switch mid-game to being into more of a mid-range style game plan, converting to building a stack, and then just trying to finish off your opponent with Bloodsheath and Sonata, which we do still have access to. You know, we still have cards like Read the Runes, which Chain has access to as well for RuneGate purposes. And then we have Runeblood Barrier, and you have Blessing of the Occult. So you still have a lot of ways to generate rune chants, which means Vizarai can still pop off very consistently, and having Bloodsheath is still one of the most powerful cards that that enacts Vizarai's game plan, right? Dirge just kind of lowers the speed and consistency of what that plan can provide to you, but it's still very accessible. So I do still see Vizarai having a really, really good share of the meta, being able to be incredibly fast with the cash-in Royal plan, while also still being able to build a stack for some of those slower matchups such as Starvo, where you might just want to build up and OTK him. So Vizarai is still going to be quite powerful. Not having Rosetta Thorn, though, is a big hit, and I do think is a pretty good change in addition, because a lot of times that OTK plan didn't really matter. You were like never really swinging your sword anyway, so having it just be a Reaping Blade is pretty insignificant to the overall power of what the deck is trying to do. Okay, so then on top of that, what does that mean for some of these other heroes? So if I'm going to look at the meta, I think that the best decks that have largely been completely unhit from this at all are going to be Starvo and Briar. You know, I've been saying for about a month now, even after the last ban, I still think Starvo is one of the best decks in the game. And I do think now even more so, now with Chain and Vizarai getting toned down a little bit, I think that just opens up more room for Starvos to really showcase its consistency and its overall power level across the board, especially in the hands of some of the best players in the world. I think them having access to Starvo is going to be very comfortable. It's going to be very, not easy to play, but it's going to provide a lot of easier games, because if you just get those Starvo activations, you can just kind of like breeze through your opponents and just kill them very quickly and efficiently. So I think Starvo is still going to be up there. Briar is largely unchanged from these bans compared to the other Rune Blades. Dirge means nothing really, and then Thorn is like a minor hit, but you can again just switch to Reaping Blade and it doesn't really change a lot of what you were doing. It just basically knocks off a little bit of your damage cap between your sword, and you lose the arcane split damage, which was convenient in some games to just be able to kill your opponent. But the deck is largely untouched. You still aren't incredibly hurt by Warmongers. Your card pool density is just very, very high, and a lot of the cards that you have in your deck are very powerful. Like, the deck is mostly Majestics, and you've cut a lot of the chaff, and it's just incredibly lean. You just play a lot of really powerful cards. So I just think that Starvo and Briar are very convincingly sitting at the top of the meta right now if I was to pick a deck. I do think that Vizarai falls in close. He's still probably in like the A tier area, but I think that we also will then see a coalition of like Zen, Dio, Dromai, and Prism still existing in a sphere where I would not be shocked if they made top 8 or even won the event because of their power level. And now with having the Rune Blades just chip down a little bit more, it allows them to kind of shine and allow them to showcase their power. Zen and Dio are just some of the most explosive decks in the game, really just showcasing, like, you know, no matter what, turn 1, turn 2, you could just pop off on your opponent and kill them. Dio does have the one downside of being affected by Warmongers, Zen having the upside of being able to play Warmongers, by both having a contradiction to their power, where Zen can just be inconsistent, and if you don't transcend, you are really lacking a lot of the power that the deck has access to, and you can just play a very fair game, which isn't always great. And then Dio, in a similar place, being one of the most powerful combo decks to ever exist in Flesh and Blood, and if you just have a good game, you can just really put your opponent in a situation where nothing they do matters and they just get killed. But you are very susceptible, obviously, to Warmongers and Fatigue, potentially, depending on if you're playing against Starvo or Dromai or even Prism, but those matchups can be pretty tough in different ways. But I do think that nerfing the Rune Blades a bit does allow Illusionists to have a little bit more space to exist in the game again. They're kind of just been existing on like a B tier axis for a little bit, where they're incredibly powerful and they do a lot of good things, but they have been able to just be kind of outclassed by Rune Blades, just being ran over consistently. They don't have a lot of tools to still leverage that ability to block out like OTK plans from Zen, just the insanely overwhelming value that Runegate Chain gets, and then Briar's just consistent speed and output, which outclasses them and always has historically in Flesh and Blood, right? It's not like this is a new thing. Illusionists have always had a tough time with Rune Blades. So when Rune Blades are the best decks in the game, they kind of can get pushed down in a certain level. But I do think that Prism Awakener of Soul in particular, still a deck that is very, very powerful and not to be like misguided or looked over when considering it as a potential option for one of the best decks in the game. So if I was going to pick, I think any one of those decks very, very easily could be seeing a very strong performance, could very easily be in top 8, and could win the event. Also looking at the calling, like again, I know I'm talking about Worlds, but I think that this also just transcends into the calling. But if you're going to look at like rogue options, I think that Icelander, even though she is much less powerful than she was before and kind of can just get exploded by a lot of these decks, she still has a lot of the tools to be able to leverage to combat them, particularly against the Rune Blades in addition. So I do think Icelander is a rogue option that I wouldn't count on being incredibly powerful, but still has some ability to compete. New is another option as well. I think that she actually is quite good into the aggro decks, and there's a lot of aggro decks. She still just suffers from the issue that like if you don't get disruption on a good turn, you can just get popped by Dio, Zen, or any of the Rune Blades. Even Starvo can be a tough matchup where I would say that's one of the matchups you kind of want to play against, but Starvo just inherently is so powerful that if you just get fused like 3 times in the game, you don't have CYB anymore to kind of pat those particular interactions or pad them where you could survive. Now you kind of will just get killed. So I think New sits in an interesting spot where she might have some play. Kano obviously is always a deck that just exists, and being in the LL format, you still have a lot of power in your innate ability to perform. The only issue is that Rune Blades are very tough matchups. Again, they have a lot of Spell Void. They have good Arcane Barrier that's just very inherent into their armor suite. It doesn't really cost a lot for them to play it. Dio is very tough. Zen can be tough just about how powerful and fast they are, but you know, in combination, Kano can also do the same thing and pop people. There might be an Acilio build out there, but I think that's getting a little creative. And then I also think that, what was the other deck that I was thinking of with Kano? Man, I'm so sorry. I know somebody is like screaming at me in the camera, like this deck is probably really powerful, and I'm sure you're right. Aurora, obviously, because I was going to talk Florian. Stack Florian is an interesting deck. Losing Dirge is a hit, obviously, but Stack Florian is no pushover. Like that deck can still do some pretty dumb things in LL. And again, losing Thorn basically does nothing. Warmongers is not really that big of a deal for him because most of the time you're just going to be calling peace and building rune stat checks anyway. So I could see Florian doing okay. And then Aurora, of course, largely unaffected by Warmongers and losing Thorn. So she pretty much still does her natural combo game plan with Ball Lightnings and Arc Lightning and stuff like that. So I do think that there's a decent amount of rogue options that could still exist in the meta and perform pretty well. But if I was to just look at what are the best decks, I'm sticking with my Briar, Starvo, Zen, Dio, Dromai, Prism kind of thing. So if you want to play some of these other rogue decks, I think they're very good at targeting certain aspects of the meta. But if you're rolling in with the best players in the world, trying to play the best decks at the highest level, I think you're going to see them kind of converge onto some of those earlier options that I had already spoken about. So going forward, I think I'm going to probably try to start making some videos just for people who are going to be viewing Worlds and want to get a better idea of what to expect or what they're going to be looking at. I'm going to just do a short series kind of like leading up to Worlds where I'll talk about some of these heroes, talk about what they used to be, how they've changed, what updates they've gotten, what kind of new tools they have access to, and what you can expect to see them and in what form they will be in Worlds. And now that I have the final ban lists and everything, and I know that that's exactly how it's going to be, I can move forward freely and start making those videos. So expect those over the next coming weeks. I'll be dropping some more videos talking about the Rune Blades, the Illusionists, Starvo, some of these rogue decks that I mentioned, and you can start getting a better idea of what you're going to see at Worlds, how they're going to be played, and what to expect in terms of matchups and just how they've changed, right? How they've grown from their conception to where they are currently in the Living Legend meta. So I hope you guys are happy about this. I'm pretty happy about it, to be honest. I mean, if you've been listening to anything I have been saying over the last month, this is pretty much what I've wanted. So I'm very much so interested in seeing how it will develop, how the world's meta will take, and how these pro level players now, with the small amount of time they have left to prepare for the event, what edges and innovations they'll be able to discover leading into the final event of the year. So leave your comments below. I've been really enjoying the engagement about other people's opinions on Living Legend format, how they feel about it, given the fact of the meta and the level of interest that it has in terms of a very engaged. I do think that there has been a lot of good discourse and a lot of good comments made, and it clearly seems that LSS is listening and they are actively changing and doing something about it to appease the comments that you guys are leaving and the overall consensus on the meta. So I'll talk to you guys soon. Again, look out for those videos, and I love you all. Leave a comment, leave a like, whatever you really feel. I'm Sam Dando, and I'll talk to you guys soon.